because of your past behavior. But
All right, I'm going to be quiet right now. I'm going to be quiet for 2 minutes, and you can answer.
Okay, yeah, sure, go ahead. So, now you're asking me a loaded question, which is, when did you stop beating your wife? So I'm obviously not going to answer that specific question. But in regards to what is the non-aggression principle, the non-aggression principle is an ought claim, but it is also an axiom. One can choose to follow that axiom or not follow that axiom in their system of ethics. But if you have an ethical system that you attempt to justify, then that is where you must follow, or your system must be commiserate with the non-aggression principle, or it falls into contradiction. That is the claim that I'm making. So you are correct that the NAP is a moral claim that one ought not aggress upon other people. But when we are talking about bridging kind of the is-ought gap from descriptive to prescriptive ideology, what I'm saying is that it is a means of negating ethical justifications when they go against the non-aggression principle. So, boom, finally.
I don't even know what that is supposed to mean. Means of negating. What is that supposed to mean?
Right. So, libertarianism as a whole is, the NAP is axiomatic to libertarianism, but things such as like argumentation ethics and other forms of logic would showcase that people that attempt to justify the law, the jungle, or are no longer engaged in ethics, right? If you're saying some people can be slaves or some property can be taken, then your moral claims aren't universalizable and they fall into contradiction.
Are moral claims universalizable?
Well, for it to be a true moral claim, it would have to be universal.
So there are universals?
Yeah.
Okay. How do you justify universal claims?
How do I justify the existence of universal claims? Like, can you give me an example of one to just make it easier and simpler?
Yeah, one ought follow the NAP.
Well, so we would start with existence exists, then we would move into formal law.
Existence exists. What is that supposed to mean?
It's an unavoidable axiom, right? So one cannot argue against.
I mean, it's a self-referencing basically version of the identity principle. But what does that mean? Existence exists.
That means that existence exists, right? It is self-referencing in that situation, but one cannot argue against the concept of existence.
Actually, you can, because you can actually pretty easily, because existence is.
Oh yeah, I could say cats have wings.
No,
right?
existence. No. I'm making a different point. That existence is a very contested, ambiguous term in the history of philosophy. It's a metaphysical claim. So, have you justified any metaphysics yet?
I would start where we're starting with existence, right? Existence justifies itself by negation.
Existence justifies itself. What is your proof for the proposition existence justifies itself?
It is, you cannot make any form of logical argument about anything without justifying it, without existing. Like, it's impossible to make a claim.
That's not even actually true. I mean, Boolean approaches to logic have made it deontological. So you can actually make logical arguments without ontological claims. So that's not even true.
You're making an argument. The moment that you make an argument, you justify your existence.
No, that's not even true. That's not a justification, and that's a fallacious move. So it doesn't prove.
Can you argue against existence?
It doesn't prove the metaphysical notion or the linguistic symbols that you use for the word existence are correct. In other words, it assumes all kinds of things like language, predication. Language and predication. Now, right. So if you'd had a philosophy language class, you would know that words like existence presuppose metaphysical structures like universals, like predication, like grammar. And none of those things have been demonstrated yet.
Okay, it's not the concept of existence, what we were just talking about, not the definition of the word existence. So everything that you just said is silly. Right?
No, everything I said is basic philosophy.
Is just no, it is.
The fact that you think that there's self-evident axioms.
Other people might have, like, what is the definition of the word? What do you mean?
You don't think that the word existence is
the concept
so
itself.
what is it referring to?
The concept itself is is impossible to
Are
argue.
concepts in
Can
this
you
case,
argue against
are they
existence?
based on linguistic philosophy?
Can you argue against existence? You haven't
It
answered
doesn't
my
matter because
question.
that won't get you to justification. Even if I admit
Can
that,
you argue? So you
even
admit
if I
you can't
admit,
argue against existence.
it doesn't matter because it doesn't achieve justification. So even if I admit skepticism and play the role of a skeptic and counter your claims about existence being existence, it doesn't prove anything. It doesn't get you anywhere because I'm pointing out that it's not self-evident if it relies on things like predication, linguistic philosophy, and grammar, which you haven't proven yet. So it's not self-evident.
It does not. The concept of existence does not. It's not.
The proposition existence
the
exists.
concept of you
The proposition
understanding-
is itself relying on.
the
Does it rely on the law of
concept
identity?
No. The
Yes,
law
it
of
does.
identity would come after
Existence exists is relying on the law of identity.
No, it would come after existence.
Oh my gosh.
Right? Like once.
No,
once,
to
once
say
you recognize
existence exists relies on the law of identity. You're predicating identity.
Yes. Aristotelian formal logic, right? Like law of identity, law of excluded middle, and law of non-contradiction, right? Are going to be the foundation for making the argument that existence exists.
I'm calling into
It
question
was
the
same thing with
argument.
language and all those other things. But what I'm saying is that by one attempting in any language, in any means, anytime a moral,
I know what you're saying.
moral
It's called
actor
retorsion.
attempts to make a claim that requires existence for them, that it presupposes existence.
I am aware of that, but that still doesn't get you. I know that. I know it's called retorsion. It's called retorsion, and it doesn't get you to justification. That's the point.
All right. So how are you justifying existence? Because you clearly believe that existence.
Well, I believe in the transcendental argument for God's existence, and that's the ground for the logical categories which make it possible to predicate at all. So that's my worldview account. But even if I admit, let me explain the point as to why it doesn't get you justification, right? So this comes up after Enlightenment philosophers raised the question about justification in this domain when it comes to, for example, Kant says, one reason that just retorsion alone doesn't get you to justification is that we don't know that the seeming impossibility of not being able to argue or to use logic or to have conceptual frameworks itself means that it's the case in the external world. So even if you could demonstrate that I can't argue or have human conceptual predication or language without assuming something like the law of identity or existence exists or whatever, it still doesn't get you to justification because that even if it doesn't seem possible, it would become a fallacy of incredulity that I don't see how else you could reason. Still doesn't grant you justification, and all you need is one defeater to prove.
I'm not making the argument that it doesn't seem possible. I'm making the argument that it is not possible.
So if you're saying it's not possible, you would have to demonstrate. Then I know that. So then you would have to answer Kant's dilemmas of how you know there even is an external world to which these categories apply.
Okay, so Kant's dilemma in how do I know that there is an external world, right?
To where the concepts apply, like when he critiques the ontological argument, he's pointing out that there's nothing about the term existence that contains within it the notion of perfection. So just proving that something exists doesn't get you these other metaphysical qualities like perfection. So likewise, in your case, the same problem applies.
What is? Hold on, if you could explain it for me better. Like, what is like perfection or like the noumena, like thing in it of
Kant's
itself?
critique.
Right? Like
I'm saying that Kant's critique of the ontological argument is applicable to the argument that you're making about the ontological claim that existence exists. I'm saying that you need all kinds of things to be the case for that to hold or to be true. And those other things have not been proven yet, and so it's not self-evident or axiomatic. It rests on a bunch of other assumptions. All the things I've listed, like language, predication,
it's like
grammar.
Space, time, causality, I think, are like Kant's major ones, correct?
Well, when Kant critiques the cogito, he says that it assumes time and space, but I'm not making that argument.
Okay. So,
but it's similar to that
argument. Right. Okay. So your argument is that you need. I'm having a hard time understanding. Hold on, my mom's calling me real quick.
For you to say existence exists and to say that that's self-evident and axiomatic because if you denied it, you couldn't reason about the world, you couldn't reason at all. I agree with that principle and that point, but that does not get you to epistemic justification because it doesn't answer Kant's dilemma that even if the proposition is true, you don't know that it applies to an external world without assuming an external world. And I agree with you that we should assume an external world, but the point is that you haven't demonstrated an external world yet, and so the propositions are not axiomatic.
Even if we were like in the Matrix or something, there must be an external world for existence to exist.
But you haven't proven that yet, and so that's why the statement's not axiomatic. So it rests on other beliefs.
Well, it would still be. I mean, I could.
If something axiomatic, or no,
it could be false axiom, but like people can have axioms.
Self-evident axiomatic beliefs can't rest on another belief. That's the point, or else they're no longer self-evident.
What is the belief that existence exists is resting upon?
In this case, that it applies to something in an external world to give it meaning and content to refute my point about why it doesn't get you to justification. You need it to apply.
The external world is the existence itself.
You haven't shown that.
You haven't.
Now you've you haven't demonstrated that.
No, existence.
How do we know that it's not a conceptual
existence? There is a material world that exists.
Now you're adding. Now you're moving the goalpost because there's nothing in the word existence.
What am I moving away from?
There's nothing in the word existence that necessarily tells you that it's about an external world. That's what you just added and altered.
Well, you might be.
Existence exists, and now you're modifying it to say that, well, that means necessarily the external world. What is there in the word existence that necessarily means external world?
Hold on. So I think you might actually be right on this, only because existence is objectivist. It's Randian, right? So she wouldn't deny, or I don't think she would support any idea of like the spiritual or any other type of world other than the material world. I think it is probably implied, but maybe not explicitly stated. So like, yeah, that's fine if you want to critique existence exists, to like a better.
Well, I'm just giving examples of why it doesn't.
It doesn't. The modern world.
I'm just giving examples of why it doesn't get you to self-evidence or justification in an epistemic sense.
Well, it's like you're saying it doesn't because there could be a spiritual world that is of non-existence.
I never said any of that.
Well, you're saying that it doesn't imply that the material.
All I need is one defeater, and I've given you a couple defeaters. It doesn't mean that I have to adopt all of Kant's positions. So no, I don't believe all of Kant's positions. I'm asking.
Your argument is that existence exists doesn't imply the world we live in.
Correct. That's a Kantian critique.
Right, and Kant wasn't alive to critique existence from the objective.
He made this critique in a similar way, critiquing the ontological argument. That's what I'm saying.
So when I make the argument existence exists, and you're saying, well, this doesn't necessarily imply to the existence we're in. Mm-hmm. I guess I don't have an argument for that because we exist in the existence we're in. There is no other existence.
Well, that's just reasserting the thing. That's just reasserting the thing in question.
Right. Well, I'm actually genuinely trying to understand your critique here. It's not like I'm not. Like how?
Well, the point. To make it very clear,
we live in this world, right? We are acting, we're behaving, we're attempting to justify.
The point is that
our ethical systems.
The point is that.
What way does this make sense?
The point is that all beliefs, all propositions, all statements, truth statements, etc., in my view, are theory laden, and so this has been a long walk to get to the point to try to prove or demonstrate that. Classical foundationalism, which is the epistemology that the Enlightenment relies upon in most libertarians, is philosophically and epistemically on faulty ground. And it doesn't make me a Kantian simply because I'm using his argument that there's nothing necessarily about the word existence that entails a material external world. I could be an idealist. Maybe I believe that all the world is a Platonic ideal, and for me the word existence just means ideas, like Plato, right? Or that's the highest.
But now you're just changing the argument.
I'm giving you an example of why the word existence does not have self-evident meaning to it. It's contingent. Let me finish. It's contingent upon a paradigm.
So if I just start changing the meaning of words, right, and then saying that, well,
I mean, you're the one that did that, where you modified existence to mean a material external world, but there's nothing necessary about the word that tells you that.
The existence exists as an argument, as a justification for the world in which we live.
It's not a justification, right? Because it's a restatement of a self-evident, in your view, truth. It doesn't tell you anything about the world. You're assuming it does, but how do you know it does?
Well, it tells you that an individual cannot. The reason is an unavoidable axiom. It is axiomatic.
But you keep calling it unavoidable, resting on the assumption that it actually applies to an external world, which you haven't demonstrated.
But you're not making argument.
That's a critique. It's an internal critique. My argument is an internal critique.
Yeah. But you're saying that there is a way that you can defeat existence exists argumentation by redefining words and concepts of what existence is.
No, I'm simply pointing out.
I'm clarifying what existence means in the objectivist framework, and you're saying, but what if I?
But it's a non sequitur. There's nothing about the word existence.
Make the argument.
It's
but
a
the moment that you attempt to,
it's a non sequitur in your system.
The moment that you attempt to argue that the world is actually just like this Platonic forms, or that
I didn't say that. I just gave an example. That wasn't my point.
I say I'm using you as in like the universal one, right? The one that one. Attempts to make any form of justification, they do so in the world that we live in. Right?
I mean, again, assuming that there is an external world, which you haven't demonstrated yet.
So, right,
the whole point is not because you don't understand what a defeater argument is. It doesn't mean that I'm a skeptic like Hume. It means that I'm using the argument from Hume and Kant to prove why your assertion existence exists is not self-evident. It rests on other things. That's the point.
But you haven't shown that it rests on other things.
I gave you multiple examples. For example, it rests on the assumption that it applies to the external world. Have you demonstrated that existence exists applies to the external world and not just a conceptual framework? When was that justification?
Again, who can exist, right, without existence?
So you're answering a question to answer the question I asked you?
I'm trying to get you to understand.
Maybe
my argument
maybe everything is an ideal existence and there is no external world. I don't believe that, but I'm saying that your assumptions are not justified even within your own system. How do I know that the word existence, when it has a vast array of meanings throughout the history of philosophy, somehow necessarily means a material, physical, external world? There's nothing about the word existence that necessarily means that. And when I ask you how you know that or why we should think that, you say it just has to be that way. Well, that's a fallacy of incredulity.
So, the necessary condition for existence is, hold on, let me not go there. You're saying that the argument isn't justified because one could make arguments outside of reality.
I'm saying that it's a non sequitur and that it rests on multiple other assumptions which have not been proven, and so it's not self-evident.
Some existence is self-evident. I don't understand.
You just keep asserting the position. That's a variation on the original position. And how do we know that? What does that mean?
Because we obviously exist in some capacity.
So your answer is that it's just the case. So the answer is, again, that it's just the case. So
does
classical foundationalism?
It's an unavoidable axiom, right?
Again, you keep asserting that, but then you've admitted that it relies on other things like an external world, which the proposition itself does not contain within it a necessary existence of an external world.
So I have put forward that existence exists, and you've heard that argument. Beat it, right? You say it does. It's not justified because it relies on other assumptions. What do you have a counter argument for our existence?
Yes, and again, it's the existence of God grounds and justifies the transcendental categories which make possible things like predicating about existence in the created realm. So there's not even one.
There's not even existence exists just with God.
No, because in Christian theology, for example, there's two types of existences. There's uncreated and created. And so there's nothing about the word existence that tells me necessarily which one is even being referred to. Because I believe in my paradigm that there's uncreated existence who is God himself, and there's created existence, which is the created world. Those are two types of existing things. So there's nothing self-evident about the word existence that necessarily tells you anything.
Yeah. What is an uncreated existence?
God himself.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's but what do you mean by that? Like, what is an uncreated existence?
It means that he is timeless. It means that he is non-composite. He is outside of time and space. He is transcendent. He is immanent. He is perfect. All the attributes that we would ascribe to God in our system.
So when you say he's timeless, what do you mean by that?
It's a
doesn't exist in reality.
No, so outside of time, meaning that he's eternal. He created time. He's outside of time.
So, would a vampire be an uncreated existence if he's immortal?
Anything mortal is created by definition.
Okay, so he doesn't exist in reality.
Vampires. Yeah, but I'm just pointing out that the word existence doesn't necessarily tell you anything self-evident without a paradigm to inform the word and its meaning. Even language itself, this is why I mentioned earlier to you linguistic philosophy, it's a holistic structure. It's an epistemic holism, which means that there's no words that function in an independent way. You could read Wittgenstein on this because he talks about how words and terms are part of linguistic structures and systems because they all relate to one another. So there's no such thing as a word called existence or ontos or physis or being or whatever that somehow has a self-evident necessary meaning apart from the entire paradigm or worldview that you have that informs it. That's why I was mentioning.
Yeah. So it is true that words, have a shared meaning that we kind of assume people get, right? Like, and we see language change constantly, where
Correct.
A word has a
That's
meaning,
true.
and then over time, the meaning of the word kind of changes from the cultural context. Because it's just a function, right? It's a tool. A word is just a tool to describe a concept, and communication is more often than not imperfect, right? But what I'm trying to understand is, I agree that is a problem in argumentation. You have to kind of assume that the reader understands the meaning of the word that you have,
right? But
and that isn't always perfect. But how do you justify? How does your position differ in existence exist? In so far that it justifies, like saying God is uncreated, is like you're just saying it's outside of the rules and it exists and it doesn't exist.
Well, no, outside of your rules. So I have a different paradigm. So I'm thinking and arguing in terms of paradigms or worldviews as a whole. The transcendental argument is a comparison of two worldviews or paradigms. So it involves the entire system because the Christian theistic system conditions what I mean by words like existence or time or creation or whatever. All of those things are conditioned.
Hold on. How does that? How does Christian ethics, like all these things are made up of words, right? So it's the same problem that would occur in any.
Well, I don't have the belief that words are and language are all purely social constructs. I believe that what the words refer to is conceptual and universal and objective and not subjective.
Yeah, but the words themselves are just communicating concepts or ideas.
Right, but that's why the words can be flexible. You can have Roman numeral VII or the Arabic number 7 that refer to the same abstract conceptual entity.
Right,
but that has nothing to do.
That doesn't get us to any justification of like how you solve the problem as you see that justification can't be met on anything unless we posit a God. But I don't understand how that.
Because the tag argument argues that any predication, any proposition relies on the structures that are necessary for the possibility of language and predication. So, in other words, to say a sentence like "the tree is red," the tree is green, rests on a certain type of world where there is regularity in nature. It rests on the possibility of having knowledge, universals, linguistic structure, grammar. All of those things are presupposed in the action of making a proposition.
Well, yeah, but that would be true for objectivist philosophy as well.
Right, but the difference between you and I, the difference between you and I is how we give an account for those things, and that your accounts are not good accounts, is what I've been arguing.
So what is your good account that solves this problem in the way that existence exists?
Well, there are no self-evident positions or statements because they're embedded within a network or a web of beliefs that we all have. And thus, if my system or my view is holistic, if I'm an epistemic holist, then I have to give an account for the system as a whole and how those structures or how those preconditions are the case. So if I need the possibility predication, universals, mathematics, logic, all of these categories, being, the true, the good, etc., to have knowledge at all, then I need to give some account for those things, those categories that my statements are relying on. And the transcendental argument argues that only God is the type of being who could give a justification or account for those things.
So you're just saying only God can do this, so therefore God. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that the argument is that the only being who can give a grounding for those things is the being revealed in the Christian worldview.
Well, how is so? But God doesn't exist in reality.
Well, I don't even know what does that mean.
Because we said he's an uncreated existence. So
that
he doesn't
mean
exist
that
in
I said
time
that
and space.
I said he's transcendent.
No, how is he doing this?
I said he's transcendent and he's immanent. That means that he exists outside of time and in time.
So he does exist in reality.
Well, you keep calling reality. I would say there's two realities. There's created reality and uncreated reality. So when you say
there's
it,
a
you
reality
assume
outside of material reality.
Yeah.
Okay, how do you prove that?
Well, I could prove it by the transcendental argument and the impossibility of the contrary, that anytime you utilize language, you're utilizing conceptual, abstract things that are not reducible to physical sense data, and that only God in the Trinitarian sense could give a justification for how that's possible.
Well, no, reason alone explains that. Humans have the capacity for reason.
Hold on.
Create concepts.
You're all humans?
Well, humans as a category. You mentioned a Bayesian.
How do you have a justification for categories?
How do I have a justification that humans have the capacity?
No, that there are things called quote categories like this.
I'm trying to figure out a way to answer this that you would accept it. How do I justify that categories exist in the mind that people make?
Well, hold on. So now they're just in the mind. They're not actual. They're not outside the mind. Like the number.
Well, they're not material.
They're not material.
No, of course not.
Okay, so there's immaterial things.
There's no category tree, right?
There are immaterial things that exist and material things.
Right. The mind does not create reality. Okay? Reality exists independent.
Okay, how do you know that there are two types of things, physical and immaterial?
Well, we do have sense data. You mentioned.
How does your sense data tell you that? So you mentioned Hume, but how does your sense data tell you that there's immaterial things that are not based in sense data?
How does my sense data tell me that there are things that are not sense data?
That's what you just said.
Is that the question?
Yeah.
No, I said that we can see things in reality.
How does seeing things tell you that there are immaterial things?
So the first thing is that we can see that there are material things, right?
Well, I would say with the myth of the given, you don't even know that, and you haven't demonstrated that yet. But if I grant you that, how does that get you to immaterial?
Even if I was like, there has to be.
You keep saying has to, and if you knew philosophy, you would know there's no has to any of this. You got to demonstrate that. You can't just assert that.
Well, okay. Well, if you interrupt someone, then they can't make their full argument.
So empiricism won't get you to universal categories. Is the point?
Yeah. No, I don't disagree that empiricism gets you to I don't disagree.
Okay. So what's the justification for the immaterial things?
Well, the justification for immaterial things is that that concepts exist. You mean?
Well,
like ideas.
How do you know that? How do you know that the concept in my head of humans as a category is the same as the concept in your head? How do you can't verify?
Well, no, you don't. Well, we've already stated that you can't necessarily verify that.
Okay, if you can't verify that, then you believe in immaterial things without justification that you can't verify.
Well, so do you. You don't know.
No, I believe in verification. I believe that I can justify it.
So you believe that
that's
you
a
can
tu quoque. That's a tu quoque. That's a tu quoque.
No, but
that's a tu quoque. No, but you. No, but you is a tu quoque.
No, it's not no, but you, because you
just said no, but you. My worldview is different. I have a different account.
Yeah, I understand.
You're not understanding that I have a different account than you.
I understand that you like to interrupt people and then.
This is where once again you're deflecting, because I brought you to a point.
I'm not deflecting.
You said you just see it. What's the justification? Listen, when you say what about you? That's a tu quoque. Do you know what a tu quoque is?
I asked you if you had the similar belief, or that
it doesn't matter what my similar beliefs are. I will go into
Then you
that.
said that
I
you
will go
could.
into that. It doesn't matter if I
No,
believe.
you
I
could.
have a different account of immaterial
I
things.
why are you
I have a different
why are
account of
you like
material
this?
things than you.
We were finally starting to get to talk like adults, and you went
And
back into
again,
this. Like,
now that you've been pinned
come on.
down, you don't want to go into it.
No, I have
What
no
is the
problem getting into
justification
anything.
for
Oh my
immaterial
God, you're
things?
doing.
What is your justification for immaterial things?
What is my justification that immaterial things exist? So first I start with existence exists, but you say that that's not valid. But we'll just move on. So
Well,
things
you
that
kind of
exist.
admitted that there's problems for that. So
No, I didn't.
did you demonstrate
Exist-
did you demonstrate the external world, which you said it means?
I said that in order for us to have existence, we have to exist in some type of way.
Have you demonstrated that?
You demonstrate that. We've
No,
both
you said an
demonstrated that by
external
arguing.
world. What if we live in a mental world? You haven't proven that it's the external material physical world that we have necessarily. You haven't proven that. You've just asserted it.
The mind cannot exist without a material.
How do you
function.
know that? You just assert this. What's the justification for this?
Well, so the justification for how reason or consciousness comes to be.
You keep
is-
asserting all
so
kinds of metaphysical claims, like that there's immaterial
We do.
realities, and you've not justified
do.
any of these.
we do exist in some form of existence, right? Let's take into account that you said that.
I mean,
Existence
we exist in a
purely
form
of
of
the mind.
existence is basically a meaningless phrase.
Yeah. I'm going through it, right? So
Okay.
we exist. We could exist in by you're asserting. What if we exist in the frame of the mind? We would then have to note that an existence must have some form of identity, specific identity.
How do we know that? Maybe it does. Maybe we're all schizophrenic, and our schema in our minds don't match up to anything in the external world. We just interpret it like it does.
Yeah. So if you deny the law of identity, then this entire conversation is meaningless.
So, but wait a minute. You said that existence exists doesn't rely on the law of identity earlier.
Well, we moved past existence. What do you mean?
No,
So
we're,
you're
no,
saying
we're still
that- you're
talking
saying
about
that
it.
you could
So you're
invalidate
saying
the
it
law of
does
identity.
rely on the law of identity.
If the law of identity is no, I'm saying that I'm moving from existence exists and then making
That's a
separate
proposition that relies on the law of identity, obviously.
I'm making a separate claim, which is essentially that the law of identity.
Okay, how do we know that the laws like that and the classical Aristotelian laws are the case and that they apply? And by the way,
Well, we perceive existence.
perceiving existence. You don't understand
mind-
why you don't
the mind
understand why that
perceives
doesn't
existence.
answer that question. You're
Well, I'm
basically
saying
just
that
saying.
because we
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
go ahead. No, you go ahead. It's fine.
You're basically just saying that my position is the case because if you look at my position, it states that this is the case, and that's what the words mean. My position.
No. What I'm saying is that premise one or axiom one, I guess, would be existence exists. That we exist in some that to argue for.
But
to
how do you
argue
know that?
against our existence?
How do you know that?
Because of the negation. You can't argue against your own existence. To do so presupposes existence. It's impossible to argue against existence.
I'm making the argument right now, and what if our conceptual schema just seems to be the case in our minds, but doesn't apply to an actual external ontological existence? How do we know that is the question. And you can say that because it has to be that way, but that doesn't answer the objection or the defeater.
No, I'm saying that if you make the argument that existence doesn't exist, you fall into contradiction.
No,
You're
that's not the
violating
argument.
The argument.
The argument is that existence exists necessarily applies to some external physical world. You've not demonstrated the external world yet. And thus, it's not axiomatic because it relies on other positions and other beliefs.
Well, the first axiom is existence exists. Once we recognize that one must exist in some capacity, then
when you
we
say
can move
one,
on
you're
to-
just assuming the existence of the self. Have you not read a critique of the Code
Yes,
of Self?
well, of course, I'm assuming the existence of the
Oh,
self.
well, then thank
I
you. Then
exist-
it's not self-evident. It assumes other things. Exactly.
No, it's the individual.
Does it
individuals
assume the
do
existence of the self?
It is the self that makes the argument, is it not?
So is it assuming it?
Well,
Is
obviously
is
the
the
self
proposition
exists. Yeah.
assuming?
Would you? Okay, we'll put another axiom before it.
Oh,
The
my gosh.
self exists. in existence exists.
But no. Now you're moving the goalpost to add another proposition ahead
I'm not adding the goalpost. I'm saying that's fine. I'll add.
Okay, then if the second proposition
is existence,
then it's no longer self-evident because it relies on another proposition, obviously.
So the self exists, right? You disagree that the self exists.
No, I'm saying it doesn't matter how you construct it. It's no longer self-evident because you're adding other propping up beliefs. So if you study this,
it's self-evident because the self is the one that argues. If someone attempts to argue,
that's a category error. That's a category error.
It's not a category.
Talking about the self does not make it self-evident. That's a basic mistake, man.
No, it's not a category.
It is a category error.
When I say that something is the unavoidable axiom, what I'm saying is that a person that attempts to argue, a self that attempts to argue against existence is incapable of doing so because they exist. They must exist in order to make
I know what the cogito says, and I'm giving you the classic critique of it.
An entity that doesn't exist can't make an argument against against
you're missing the point. It's not
they don't exist.
That you're not even getting what the point of the objection is. It's not an objection about the ontological status of the self or whatever. You could go that route. It's more fundamental than that. That something axiomatic or what's called doxastic or properly basic cannot rest on any other assumptions, principles, or things that have not yet been proven, or else it is no longer doxastically basic, is no longer self-evident. And so every time you tack on these other explanations, you're just proving my point that it doesn't matter whether you say the cogito or whether you say existence exists. It doesn't answer the objection that I'm laying out.
So the argument for objective reality is not existence exists. Existence exists is one.
I don't care about that.
The argument for objective reality. Well, no,
you're saying one axiom.
You're asking me to justify.
Do you know what the criteria? Let me ask it this way. Are you familiar?
You were asking me to justify this external reality, okay? And you were saying that an external reality comes from that this existence exists, presupposes this external reality. What I'm saying is that existence exists is one axiom of
it doesn't matter that you say that it's one. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because that
in order to justify objective reality,
I don't think you know what
identity and consciousness.
Well, you would need those things, but that's the point, is that you've not yet demonstrated those things.
Yeah, so because we're still stuck
on if you say yes, then you've admitted my point that it's not self-evident.
It is. Existence exists is self-evident.
No, it's not.
The same thing as an
it is not. Nor is the cogito. Nor is the cogito.
Material reality.
Again, you keep saying it is that. Arguments. You keep saying it is that, but I've given you multiple reasons why it doesn't get you to the justification for why you say that.
No, what it gets, existence exists again is one axiom. You need.
Does it rely on other things? Does it rely on other things? Does it rely on other things?
Does the existence exist rely on other things? No, it doesn't rely on anything. It is.
Does the proposition rely on grammar?
You being able to communicate that argument is not the same thing as the concept.
The truth value of the proposition. Does it rely on grammar to say it?
That's not an argument.
It is an argument. It's a classic critique. Does it rely on grammar?
If you say God is real and then someone just changes the definition of God, well then
what?
Then that's a failure of communication.
No, it's not. It's a classic critique of foundationalism. If you knew what I'm talking about, you know this.
Critique to say that it relies on our ability to communicate.
Oh, so wait a minute. So now it relies on communication skills?
That's what you're saying, not me. You're saying that language is required so that we know what the word
correct.
Exists.
Propositions that have truth value require language, right?
We are assuming when
do propositions that do they rely on language?
Yes, of course. Arguments.
Then they're not self-evident. Thank you.
That's so stupid.
No, it's not. This is like you want to go read Jay Wood's epistemology book where he makes this very argument that you think is stupid?
I think it's absolutely stupid.
How is it stupid?
This is a word game. You're not
No,
actually
you don't know
dealing
about
with the
linguistic
argument
philosophy.
itself.
I'm pointing out
It's
to you what a grad student would point out to somebody who's in a sophomore in philosophy, that you don't realize the assumptions that are being made, right? Just like when Kant critiqued the
I
cogito.
realize. No,
When
that's
Kant
not. No,
critiqued
I
the
think we
cogito,
both realize.
listen,
We both realize that language is a tool of communicating
you can
ideas,
call it that.
and
It
that
does, how
people
does that?
can misinterpret,
It doesn't
and that people
matter.
can
It's relying
misinterpret those
on
ideas.
communication
But
and
it's not an
language.
argument against the concept
Then it's not
itself.
self-evident. If it relies on another thing, whether it's time determination, predication, grammar, linguistic structure, all of those things negate the idea that it is self-evident because it is relying on other things. It is no longer properly basic.
Can a being of non-existence create language?
That has nothing to do with answering this critique of your position.
Can a being of non-existence
has nothing to do. It's irrelevant. Totally irrelevant.
A being of non-language.
A being of non-language. A being of non-language. What is a being of non-language? I don't know what a being of non-language is.
Do you know what a being of non-existence is? I don't actually, but you seem to.
A being of non-existence is something incoherent.
Right, because existence exists. Thank you. It is incoherent to say that a being exists.
I mean, this is.
Outside of
I'm
existence.
trying to be.
Thank you. So finally, we've gotten to the point where you're accepting existence exists.
I have a. Do you understand that? Do you understand? You're not understanding what the debate is. It's different accounts of that phrase. I have no problem with the truth value.
The debate is tag, and you're just fucking.
Tag is about worldview apologetics. That's the whole point. And the thing. Do you know what I mean? Look, when I say something is theory laden, do you know what I'm saying?
According
in epistemology, man, you keep saying according to me. Just in modern epistemology, do you know what I mean when I say that?
That if it's theory laden, I believe it's like that there are ideas that predicate the concept you're saying.
No,
without looking it up.
No,
that's my best.
Okay, so are you familiar with Kuhn and paradigms?
Not recently. The last time I took philosophy classes was in college, like 10 years ago. I've forgotten a lot.
Right. So
explain it to me.
So the whole point of Kuhn's paradigm is that in the world, in social discourse, in philosophy, people don't realize that their whole set of beliefs are actually based on a web of beliefs or an entire paradigm. And that all these things are interlinked and interconnected. Again, it's the term epistemic holism, and it's kind of similar to coherence theory. It's not identical to coherence theory, but it's the idea that there's no self-evident, basic, non-theory laden propositions or truths. And language is another example of this, because language, for example, a single word usually comes with a other set of words that help inform that word. And there's nothing.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the same way,
it's like the same thing. It's kind of like the same thing Derrida was constantly
Well,
arguing.
I'm not a postmodernist, but Derrida asked some of these questions. But more so relevant is Wittgenstein, because when he talked about language games, he didn't mean that just playing games. What he meant was that language is a funny thing, because the way language works is that, yes, it's flexible, and yes, it can be, you can use different symbols to denote the same idea, but the point is rather that it is systemic, and it's a holistic thing.
So how does this apply to invalidating?
Because what it shows,
because
in the history of the debate about self-evident axioms, like the way that Descartes, for example, said, I think
therefore I am.
Right.
Yeah.
So if Descartes says this, what happens is that later philosophy critiques it on many different grounds. For example, you get Kant saying that the problem with this being self-evident is that it presupposes time and space determination, right? Because to say that I exist is to say that I'm existing right now, which is right now is a time determinant at the moment, at this instant. But the argument has not proven time as a metaphysical concept or reality yet. And so Kant had a good critique that if it's properly basic, it cannot rely on another proposition or another principle or another belief that has not yet been demonstrated. That's the point. Then you get people saying it also is. Hold on. There's a couple more critiques that you get. Bertrand Russell saying it's a non sequitur. The fact that you say that you're an I does not prove that you exist in some metaphysical reality. We don't know that yet. Maybe you do, but how do we know that it necessarily follows that you have some sort of ontological existence in this world? We don't know that yet. So we all agree, yeah, we do exist in this world. I agree with you. But the point is that we got to have a good account of these principles. You can't just give an account that is arbitrary and ad hoc. And that's why I reject all classical foundationalist epistemology.
So the problem that I'm having here in this conversation or debate or whatever is I don't see it seems you're saying, how do you justify existence exists when it presupposes concept? I guess, right? Is that's kind of
well,
like
not just concepts, but I mean, I don't know what.
Trying to simplify I'm trying to steel man.
It presupposes a lot of things, and I've listed a bunch of them. And I mean, I don't think those things are just conceptual. I think they're actual ontological structures and things that exist. But if you want to call them concepts, sure.
Right, but the issue that I have is, in almost all of those, we get to this position where it's, well, how can those things be posited by a being of non-existence?
What does that mean? I don't know what you mean by, you're talking about God?
I don't know, because you're the one that is saying that there is this hole, there's this issue, there's this possibility of existence not existing. Or of
I never said that. I said uncreated existence is what God is, and we are created existence. I never said non-existence.
By the virtue of arguing, I know you're doing an internal critique. I'm not necessarily laying this claim down at you, right? But what I mean is that if one is attempting to argue that existence exists is false, then they must believe in some
I didn't argue that.
Non-existence.
I didn't argue it's false. I argued that you have not given an account of the proposition in an epistemic sense.
Right, but this is the argument would be that if it is impossible to argue against, then it must be true.
But you've not shown that it's impossible to argue against, and that's why I gave the Kantian retort, which is that just because it seems impossible to me does not mean that it is ontologically the case.
Yeah, I mean, if we're trying to make an argument from like epistemology or something, I totally agree. Right, like we could go out and observe reality and make a claim as this is true, and we have imperfect knowledge, and there is at some point a paradigm shift or something, and so like it's not necessarily proven to be true. It's just like a balance of probabilities that we assume to be true so that we can function. But the argument isn't epistemologically saying it is so. What I'm saying is that it's impossible for one to argue against. It is impossible to argue against existence, because one must exist in order to.
Yeah, you're missing the whole point of what. You're missing the point of the retorts to things like the cogito. The point of the retorts is not to deny them. The point of the retorts is to point out that you need good reasons for why that's the case. I believe it is the case, right? You could say, I believe in the self. I believe in identity over time. I believe in, the external world. I believe in causation. I believe in all these things. It's just that my account of those things, and hence justification, is a different account than the account that you're giving. So when I use
so let's.
That's what justification is about.
Let's just say we're at an impasse. You don't believe that my arguments are sufficient to justify existence. Fine, I'm okay with that. I don't want to beat that for so long that everyone is fucking annoyed, which they probably already are. It's fine. And you believe that an external world exists. So moving on to that, let's move into your worldview and why you believe that you have an appropriate account of those things that my grounding fails.
Right. So if God exists, then we have a world where there is a basis for metaphysical principles, epistemic principles, laws of logic, critical thinking, moral absolutes, ethical claims. Because man is made in the image of God, the world operates on a regular fashion in that it has divine providence, which assures the regularity of nature, which is the basis of all science and empirical sense data. I have a reasoning faculty, which I have by virtue of being made in the image of God. And so I'm a little g God who can reason about the world and make decisions and do things, create things, right? I'm a little creator because God is a creator. So for me, the the existence of God and his self-disclosure about who he is and divine revelation is itself the basis for how things like the preconditions or categories for the possibility of knowledge are the case. So because God is omniscient, because he has intentionality as being a person and not an impersonal force, and because the world is external to him and it's not identical to him, I can have the ability to make these kinds of distinctions and set boundaries. I can make, I can do things in the world because of that being made in the divine image, and also the way that I go about predicating, sentences, structure, language structure, grammar, universals, numbers. Those things exist outside of the mere human empirical individual sense data examples because they are grounded in a divine mind. This is called divine conceptualism, which itself is omniscient, omnipresent, eternal,
like
etc.
Bishop Berkeley, right?
No, he's an idealist and an empiricist idealist. I'm not arguing that at all. I'm arguing the transcendental argument.
Okay. I thought he was the guy that said, like, God is the observer, solves that problem or whatever, but maybe I'm wrong.
He's an empirical idealist. He thinks that God is the great mind and that the rest of us are just other minds observing other ideas. So he believes...
I thought that was the argument.
No, I'm not saying that all reality is ideas. Right.
Okay.
So no, I'm not an empirical idealist like Berkeley. I'm arguing for Christian theism, that there's a creator and there's the created. So reality fundamentally is two different things, created and uncreated.
Okay, so things exist outside of the mind, right? You're not like a Berkeley, right? Like we agree that
there's an external world, and there are substances, material substances, of course.
Okay. So, why is it? You're saying God is necessary. Where are you making that? I heard a lot of
God. I would say God is necessary.
God is necessary for these things.
God is necessary in the sense that he's the necessary justification for the transcendental categories that make knowledge possible. Only that type of a being could ground things like universals.
So, and I'm not trying to be an asshole when I say this, right? I'm genuinely trying to get your position here. How is this not like a God of the gaps argument? How is this not just, well, I believe God exists because only God could fix all of these problems that I see in the philosophy. Therefore, one and done, we're good.
Because it's a much stronger claim than God of the gaps. It's actually saying that any possible predication assumes transcendental categories, and transcendental categories assume God. So it's much stronger. It's not just saying that wherever I see a gap, I'm going to stick God in. It's actually saying that you couldn't make a sentence in a coherent, justifiable way without God's existence.
How? So where are you getting that? Where are you getting that from? That in order
I'm saying that is the argument.
Any transcendental. No. Yeah, I'm saying like where. Well, sure. Like we can all make arguments that true or false. So I'm saying when you say that God is necessary for any transcendental category, where are you getting that from?
Because there is no other being that could justify the transcendental categories by definition, by what they are. So
how does God justify those transcendental categories?
Because he's the only being that could ground them by virtue of who and what he is. I listed earlier, because he's omniscient, because of the omnis, because he's omnipresent, because he has personhood and intentionality. That gives us a basis for things like telos in the world. And also things like causation. So without God's existence, you couldn't have a justification for universal teleology, nor could you have a justification for causation.
But I still haven't answered my question. How? You've just said because
one
God
how
exists
is because
outside of the rules,
right, because of the impossibility of the contrary, which is the internal critique of the other worldviews or your worldview. And the other argument, the other half of it is
you said earlier You said earlier that that's not an argument. You can't justify
the other
something
part
by
of
the negation.
The other, correct. And that's why if I only had an internal critique, I would agree with you that my position wouldn't achieve justification. That's why you also have to give the positive case for why the Trinitarian deity is the one that does justify and ground them, right? Within that paradigm. Within the Christian paradigm, it makes sense why there would be rationality, logic.
Can you make that argument? Because as of right now, we're kind of on equal footing.
The argument, right, because in the Christian paradigm, right, where God exists, it's a Trinity, he creates man in his image. I'm saying that the worldview of Christianity makes a coherent sense of why there would be things like universals, because in this case, God is omniscient and there are divine ideas, and the universals are grounded in the divine mind. If you don't have a divine mind, there's no basis for universals, and thus there's no basis for predication.
Yeah, I'm not actually hearing, you're just saying the Christian doctrine says so.
No, it's a paradigm argument. And that's the argument, is that it's a comparison of one paradigm versus the other. If my paradigm gives an account for it and yours doesn't, then this paradigm is correct.
Well, I'm asking for the account. Like you're just restating that
the account is the Christian paradigm compared to your paradigm. That's the account.
But we can't be compared to my paradigm, because you
of
said
course
that
it
doesn't
can.
work.
The argument is comparison of paradigm.
Like the same reason that you said that mine is not provable.
The argument, no, it's not. You're missing the point. So you're assuming that the argument,
I'm asking for it.
The argumentation at a paradigm level is not the same thing as the argumentation on a mundane first order level. So this is a meta level argument. So it's an argument about the possibility of arguments. So if my position can give an account for, within its paradigm, how it's possible to have laws of logic, universals, metaphysical categories, et cetera, all the things I've been listing, and your position doesn't give an account for it, then my position is correct.
So you still haven't given an accounting. You said that there is one. What is the argument?
The argument is that I need universals, I need these categories. God is the only possible being, and Christian revelation has given that disclosure as to who God is. Divine conceptualism grounds the universal categories. How's that?
But again, it gets us back to like the God of the gaps.
It's not God of the gaps. I need these things. It's a God of all. The argument is all predication, not God of the gaps. That's what you're missing. So God of the gaps is this idea that whenever there's a problem, I can just kind of stick God in there. This is a way stronger claim that all predication requires a certain type of world and certain types of transcendental categories. And I'm saying that to have the transcendental categories requires some kind of metaphysical justification and grounding itself. The only type of being who could possibly ground those in a coherent way is our God. That's the argument.
My argument, and I want you to tell me why what I'm saying is false, so that I can better understand your argument, right? Which is, existence exists because it's impossible to argue against it, right? That a being, making argumentation exists in some capacity. To argue against their own existence would negate. It would be false. Like it would just be false. It would be like a performative contradiction, at minimum. And then your argument is, when I'm asking you, like, how do you justify that God solves this problem, is that it's impossible to argue against it.
No.
Because you need these other categories.
No,
like, sounds like we're making the exact same argument.
If I only did an internal critique, I would agree with you. That doesn't necessarily mean that my position is correct. But if I also offer a counter worldview to you, which does ground and give an account for universal categories, etc., all those things that I listed, then that's the positive side, and that's where it gets to justification.
But I can do the same thing, right? Which is what I put forward. Existence exists, identity.
No, you didn't give a justification. You didn't give any kind of justification. Right? You just asserted.
So we got bogged down in existence exists quite a bit.
I never heard a justification argument at all.
So so existence exists would be like axiom 1. Axiom 2 would be the law of identity.
Yeah, but you haven't you didn't prove your axioms.
Hold on. Well, you haven't proven yours. You're just saying God exists.
Yeah, but I'm not a classical foundationalist. You're trying to hold me to your standards. I don't have that same system.
Must God adhere to logic, or can God be illogical?
God is the basis for logic, is my argument.
So can God contradict?
No.
Okay, so if God can't contradict, then we agree, regardless of whatever.
That doesn't mean the account is the same. So again, you keep confusing agreement with account of the agreement. I have a different
I'm using agreement
epistemic
so that we
account.
can move forward in the argument.
But
So
it
we don't
doesn't
get bogged
work
down in
because you're
existence
missing.
exists forever.
But the reason that doesn't work to move forward is that you're not understanding it's two rival paradigms trying to give an account for the same types of things. And my argument is that my paradigm can give an account and your paradigm cannot. And not only can your paradigm cannot make knowledge possible. It's even stronger than God of the Gaps.
How is knowledge impossible under my paradigm?
Because you cannot give a justification for the assertions. That's the point. If you don't get the justification, then you don't get the assertions given to you. That's what philosophy does.
Okay, so obviously knowledge exists. So there
Again,
must be some...
you keep saying obviously, and I don't grant you any of those things. You have
Okay,
you've not yet proven that
this
anything is self-evident. You just assert it.
Okay, this is what happens when you interrupt people. Is that you start to
That's because the whole argument was continually based on you just asserting and believing in self-evident principles. And I mean, I can give you
your own.
You want to go into another?
Your own argument of tag.
It's not a classical foundational
there are
argument.
Necessary conditions, right? So
that's not what self-evidence is. That's not what self-evidence is.
Okay, brother.
That's not what self-evidence is. So you're trying to hold me to a criteria external to my worldview or system, and it doesn't work.
I said knowledge exists, and then you jump down my throat.
I don't grant you that. So again, what is that? You don't understand that. It doesn't. That doesn't apply to me.
You won't even agree with your own argument.
No, I have a different account. It's a different account.
Of actually having an.
It's a different account, man.
Does or does not your argument hinge upon the fact that that knowledge, time, space, all of these things?
But all of those words.
These are necessary.
All of those words are conditioned by my paradigm, and not your paradigm.
How am I supposed to have a conversation?
The point is that you can't have. It's a debate, and that's why you're being held to the standards of critical thinking and logic, and you don't get to assert things.
Hold on, relax. How am I supposed to have any meaningful debate if I make a statement and you immediately interrupt said statement, and that statement is even part of your own argument?
Because
come on.
Because it's not getting to and understanding the point of what the debate is. You don't understand the difference between epistemic.
I said obviously knowledge exists. I said 3 words.
I don't agree. Again, you don't understand.
It's part of your own argument.
Listen, it doesn't matter because I have a different account. So understand that this is like the word. Remember when we were talking about the word exists?
What do you mean a different account?
A different account.
Words out.
It doesn't matter how many words it is. It's a totally different account, man.
No matter what I say.
Yes, everything in the paradigm.
I'm better. You're dumb. It's
That's
not
what I said.
At that point.
I said that you haven't given a justification, which I don't think you understand what the word means still, for the assertions of self-evidence. And my position does not believe in self-evidence or ad hoc assertions. So you have the burden of proof on you. If you start your position and your system with self-evidence and things being properly basic.
I'm not allowed to apparently make my argument.
We've been talking fine for the last hour. What do you mean?
I keep trying to get through it, and you keep just going back to existence exists. So we shifted over to yours.
But you never justified it.
Again. So I'm shifting over to yours, so we can do an internal critique of yours, and I'm trying.
But your internal critique is not internal; it's your system.
Brother,
you're asking me. You're critiquing me from classical foundationalism, and that's not my system. It doesn't work.
Listen. I'm here genuinely listening to you as you lay out large arguments, trying to steelman your position. You're not giving me the same grace. It's making just being able to even have a debate or discuss difficult. Right. So I'm trying to understand, right, why it is that when you plug God into the equation, how that fixes.
It's not just plugging God in. It's pointing out that the paradigm itself is coherent, consistent, has explanatory power, and gives a justification for human knowledge, because it's a paradigm level argument. I am not plugging in. This is why I can already tell where the error is and what you're assessing. You're assessing that my position is God of gaps. And for the third time, it's a much stronger argument than God of the Gaps, which is that all predication and knowledge requires the transcendental categories. My position, I know you don't accept the argument or believe that what I'm saying is necessarily the case, but the argument is that
Yeah, of course.
in my
Yeah.
worldview or paradigm, there is a coherent, sensible account of why there would be the self, the external world, logic, etc. That is contrasted to your entire worldview and system and paradigm, which cannot give an account for even the transcendental categories themselves. That's the force of the argument.
I'm genuinely not trying to accuse you of God.
It's a it's a meta level argument, and you're trying to argue on a non-meta level. That's the point. That's the problem we're having.
My problem is that, and you say that it's somehow false to say you plug God in, but maybe I'm just dumb. Like,
do you know what a meta level argument versus a first order argument is?
I mean, like, meta would be the meta would be like the thing of itself, as opposed to like the minutia.
Right. So in other words, like logic itself, how is logic itself logical, or how do we know that it works? Right. Versus, a more mundane claim, like, and you're correct. I agree. Right. So like if I said, well, does Bill Cosby live next door to me? I don't know. I'll have to go, empirically investigate it. Right. Debating the status of logic itself is way more devastating and important and more fundamental to my worldview.
No, I agree. I
okay,
agree,
so that's why this debate is a meta level, worldview level debate.
I didn't disagree with you on that.
Okay, so then the retorts that you're giving are not understanding that in my system, God is the justification for the transcendental categories because he's the only possible being who could ground them. And you're saying, how do we know that? What's the justification? The system itself, in terms of revealed theism, is the justification in my paradigm. So you could say, well, I don't accept that. That's fine. But
yeah, I'm trying to see. So I said, if you plug God in, and you took.
It's not plugging God in. It's stronger than that. It
feels like you're plugging God in.
For the third time. The reason you said God of the Gaps twice, and I'm pointing out that it's a way stronger argument or claim than God of the Gaps. God of the Gaps says, where I see a problem, I stick God in there to try to make sense of it. This is more fundamental than that. Right. This is saying all human knowledge and predication requires the existence of our God who grounds the transcendental categories.
How are we justifying that? God is necessary.
By the impossibility of the opposing worldview not even being able to give an account for anything. It's a disjunctive argument.
But the only way that the way that you're able to say knowledge exists because God. And I don't have this God to solve that problem.
To solve the basis for the transcendental categories. So you appeal to things like being is being, existence is existence, things that are just supposed to be self-evident. And that's why I went through deconstructing how that's not self-evident.
Well, I disagree. I'm trying to get to a point where we can have this conversation, but I feel like we're kind of just at a point where we just both disagree with assertions.
I mean, this is
I
the
disagree that God solves. I disagree that like just plugging in this concept that like, oh well, God justifies everything. And therefore, if there are any issues,
and so your answer is just existence exists.
I mean, like that would be the fundamental axiom.
So can I say God? So could I say?
Argue against.
So if I come to a debate, we
have the exact same argument.
No, it's not.
My argument.
It's not.
My argument is
your argument.
Exists.
Your argument was.
Hold on. My argument is existence exists, and we go, well, you can't justify that, and I say, well, it's impossible to argue against. And then your argument is God exists. And I say, well, can you justify that? And say, well, you can't argue against that because all of the things
I said twice.
All of these other categories.
I said twice. You're not listening. I said twice that if I only gave
I promise I'm listening.
If I only gave an internal critique, you would be correct. I already said this twice. That's why you also counter with the positive case explaining the paradigm and the worldview. Because we're debating things like logic and existence and this language and this kind of stuff that are within the paradigm, within the system. So they're going to be conditioned by the systems. That's why the transcendental argument is literally saying that all argumentation at this level, at this fundamental level, is a paradigm level argument because there is no self-evident principle. So every time you try to critique me on your classical foundationalist basis, you're proving my point and not understanding that within the paradigm, justification makes sense because God literally is the only being who could ground those things. For example, let's make it clear. How could I put this into an either or? Either the
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
either the world is at a universal sense disteleological, or there is telos, there is purpose, there is teleology operant in the world. And maybe you could come up with some mixed third position where it's a little bit of both or something if you had. But in this disjunctive, there's only two and perhaps three options for an entire worldview. If you answer either way on this, you're going to be led to my position. And that's the force of the transcendental argument. You can take anything, causation, teleology, pencils, predication, and make the transcendental argument.
How am I? So, well, then let's walk through it and let's make it super simple. Either blue T-shirts exist or blue T-shirts don't exist.
No, I gave a disteleological versus a teleological world, right? That was my example.
Okay, so either meaning exists or meaning doesn't exist.
Well, purpose in the world at a grand scale, or there is no purpose in a grand scale.
Okay, yeah. Well, I was using meaning and purpose.
Okay, that's fine.
Just to simplify the argument, right? Like, so either meaning exists or meaning doesn't exist. And then you're saying that if
at a universal level, not at a subjective level.
Okay, so so meaning at a universal level doesn't exist. We'll take that into account. So my argument would be meaning does not exist at a universal level for all beings.
Thank you. Then
how do I
if that's the universal status of that proposition or claim, if that is the case, then every particular case or status of so-called meaning is also encapsulated under the ultimate non-meaning. So every argument you make is based on meaninglessness.
And how does the existence of a non or uncreated existence?
Because God is personal and intentional, and intentionality means that there is a meaningful world at a universal grand scale.
Okay, so essentially it's like Sartre and Dostoevsky.
No, it's not at all. It's not. It's a transcendental argument for teleology. I was saying, so it's similar to Dostoevsky's, like, if God doesn't exist and everything is permitted. I mean, that's a boiled down ethical version of it, but I'm making more of a metaphysical argument about purpose and teleology and intentionality. That the universe does not at a grand scale have that, then what we're the only other option is what's called accidentalism or dysteleology. And if that's the case, if that's the case, then knowledge is no longer possible.
Why is knowledge no? Because let's stick to meaning.
Because
first,
now everything is accidental. Now everything is accidental. I'm going to answer the question because everything is now accidental, including every action of knowledge is an accident, and thus there's no laws of thought or laws of reasoning which are necessary for the possibility of meaningful discourse. You would negate the possibility of laws.
You don't need a God for that.
There are no immaterial laws. You keep saying that, but what's the justification for immaterial laws if everything is an accident?
So first, let's go by this piece by piece. Okay, so I recognize that people want to discover meaning in their life, but why
at a grand scale?
Hold on. Why is it that meaning is a necessary condition for the universe? Why must the universe have meaning?
Because to have justified knowledge, you need intentionality, purpose, and laws of thought and grammar. And those things cannot exist in a world that is ultimately, purely, and totally accidental.
So, okay. So if things have identities, right? Like a rabbit exists. Rabbit names that thing has we can describe what it is. Why is God a necessary element for a conscious being able
because if the totality of existence it's not justified. That's why.
Let me finish. So why is it that I can see, like, why is God a necessary element for me to see a rabbit that is named Steve and perceive the behaviors that the rabbit gets in,
right,
the things the
right.
rabbit does?
The fact that you have the knowledge does not equate to you justifying the knowledge. That's what this whole debate has been about. Justification is not pragmatism. It's not you just having it. It's not you asserting it. It's not you believing in self-evident assertions. It's you giving an account for the things that make it possible. So you can say, well, I have, but
so those things could exist,
so
but you wouldn't be able to justify them. That's your
So
argument?
if you say, well, I believe that I've found meaning in predicating about my pet rabbits, and it gives me solace, I get warm feelies over it. In the grand scheme,
I love the fluffies.
In the grand scheme, when you die and you go into the nothingness, that is gone. And so it has no relevance or reference to the universe as a whole. And so ultimately, even though you might have subjectively felt like there was meaning there, there is no meaning beyond your own personal subjective creating of meaning. So there is no telos in your position.
Right, but why does that matter?
Because if knowledge can no longer be epistemically justified if the universe is accidental and disteleological.
If I live a life and
how does that get you to justification?
Hold on. If I live a life and I die, right, and then the world moves on without me for 1,000,000 years, right? Whatever my actions are had some effect on the world. But why does what is this? You're positing that a grand vision or meaning is necessary.
It's called accidentalism. It's disteleological. Right? This is actually a famous argument, right? If the universe at a grand scale is accidental and disteleological, then by necessity, every particular person, object, event, and thing within is also accidental, and thus there is no basis for logic, knowledge in a justificatory sense, because there are no laws of thought, because they are also accidental and disteleological and with no purpose.
Okay, so
if the grand scale universal is purposeless, all the particular parts are purposeless.
But it doesn't actually answer the question. You're just saying because it doesn't have purpose. Like we can look at
again for the third time to have the laws of the laws of thought.
No, I'm not interrupting you.
For having the laws of thought. Let me explain it. For having you can't have language without the laws of thought.
Oh my god, brother. I'm letting you make your full argument and then taking that argument.
You can't have
You're not
language
giving me the same courtesy. It is very
without
rude
the law. Okay, come on, man.
Okay, so I'm trying to I'm asking you a question and I'm not getting an answer. What I'm getting is you're appealing to the people's desire for
I didn't.
For purpose and meaning.
I did not.
I'm asking.
I didn't.
I'm asking.
Where did I ever say that? Where did I ever say that? That's totally not true. I said
you're not. But you're not. You're doing so by not actually answering the question, which is why
the very beginning point was about the universe as a whole having either a teleological intentionality purpose behind it, or it's purely accidental at a grand scale. That was what I said, very clear. And there's only two options here, or if you want to say there's a mix, you could have a third option. And you said, well, but how does that mean I can't justify knowledge? And I said, because if the universe is purely accidental, all the so-called laws within it, including the laws of thought, the laws of logic, mathematical laws, are also thus accidental and have no purpose. And so your arguments right now have no purpose by your own admission.
So you're saying that purpose and meaning is required for, let's say,
a world with no purpose and no meaning cannot give rise to universal.
Maybe I need a better definition of what you mean when you're making the argument of like teleology, purpose, meaning, etc. Like what you mean in this regard, so I can better understand.
The universe as a whole and all of its parts have a directed, intentional purpose, or they do not.
Okay, well, like a heart pumps blood. The purpose of the heart is to pump blood. Why is God necessary for the heart to pump blood?
The justification for telos in a universal sense requires some universal being or thing to ground it and justify it. That's the argument. So,
okay, well, why is God necessary for that?
God is the only being who could give an account for that.
That's not answering my question.
It is. Just you don't like the answer, but what other being could?
Why is God necessary?
Because he's the only type of being who could give an account for that.
The purpose of a heart pumps blood. I can give an account of a heart.
But you already admitted that because your account is not universally. Your account is subjective. Your account is subjective and not universally true. That's the point.
So you're saying that another person could have an interpretation of the heart?
No, I'm asking about your assertion of universals now, and you don't have a justification for how there's universals.
It would depend upon what we mean when we're talking about like the purpose of inanimate objects, right?
No, you said that this is.
Universal.
Is it true? Is it universally true?
If we're talking about the specific identity, yes, it is universally true.
Okay, how do you have knowledge of universals?
That pumps blood.
How do you have knowledge of universals as a individual, finite, empirical being?
I have consciousness. Consciousness gives.
How does having consciousness prove the existence of universals?
Well, consciousness is volitional. It's not passive.
Is what?
It's volitional. It's intentional. It's like the consciousness.
Okay, you keep what is the proof or the justification that you have these things? You keep asserting it.
Well, we have to.
Can I come to the debate and just say God just is? Can I come to the debate and say God just is?
I feel like that's kind of what you're doing.
No, I made a transcendental argument which you just don't understand, and you're coming to the debate and saying, "Well, existence just is," and it just is.
Well, I fail to see the distinction between them. I really do. But you'll just say that it's like I'm dumb or something. It's fine.
Again, the distinction is that you're not justifying all of these assertions and beliefs and dogma. You have a bunch of dogmas that you've not justified. On your paradigm.
I find that written.
On your paradigm.
I find that very written.
Okay, so is everything, you said everything is an accident, everything is without purpose, and you said, but in my personal life I can say that the heart beats. Okay, and then you said that's universally true. You don't have a justification for universals, because universals are
universally true.
No, it's not. You can say that, but you've contradicted it by saying that the universe as a whole is also purposeless. That means that your universal claims are also purposeless.
Again, this is why I asked you to clarify on your meanings of like purposefulness.
There's no purpose, telos, to anything. That means your arguments have no purpose.
You're so frustrating.
Because you're losing at this point. It's a very obvious point. If everything is meaninglessness, then your arguments are meaningless.
Brother, for the love of
God. Stop whining, dude.
Speak.
We don't care about your whining.
I know that you don't care about my whining. It's because you're a rude asshole.
Right, sure.
Regardless.
So everything is purposelessness. Everything is meaningless purposelessness. But your universal truth. You said that. Yes, you did. You said the universe was purposeless.
Oh my God.
You said that. You said at a grand scale it was.
You gave an argument that said that there's option A, option B, or potentially a mix of the two. I said, and you said that these will necessitate God when we follow them through. So I said, sure.
I said, you're right. And
it does
you
not
said,
mean that I'm saying the universe is purposeless, it's meaningless or whatever, right? Like,
there's only two options on this question. Bad faith, dude. Nobody's buying your bullshit here.
I'm not being bad faith when you say,
dude, if there's only two options, then that must be your position, right?
I say let's pick one and let's follow your logic.
Is that not your position? Is it not your position?
I don't know that I would genuinely and honestly have to think about it more.
Okay, then you're not in a position to give a justification for universal claims by that admission.
I'm not in a position to give universal claims because I don't know whether or not one specific claim is something
because of
believe in.
Because of intentionality and telos. If the universe is universally purposeless and meaningless, and now you're saying, well, I don't actually believe that, then you are arguing in bad faith.
How am I arguing in bad faith? Just because I don't, like, I would say, like...
Because there's only two options in this question for anyone.
No.
There's only two options for anyone.
No.
The whole chat is saying you lost, dude.
Hold on.
You're over.
No, this is... Shush for a second.
Don't shush me.
This is...
I'm not going to shush.
I will shush you.
No, you won't. Dude, nobody's buying your bullshit, man.
And lying.
I'm not lying. You literally contradicted yourself again.
No, listen. Again, your claim now is that it is... Talk about meta conversation. Right?
You said the universe is purposelessness, and now you're walking it back because you got refuted. You're walking it back because you got refuted again.
No, again, you said these are the two options. I said, let's explore this option. It is not bad faith.
There's only two options.
It's the exact
There's only two options.
Oh my fucking God.
You're cooked, dude. You're done. You're melting down. You're spurging out.
Oh, no.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Dude, brother.
Yeah, I guess I will finish with this. The idea that you call someone bad faith because...
Dude, you're the one who bitched about me being bad faith the entire time.
Okay, so we're starting. The idea that you would call someone bad faith because you present an argument and the person listens to it, takes notes on it,
and then walks it back when they see a problem. Correct. That's bad faith. You affirmed universal meaninglessness.
We can do this for as long as
you
affirmed like to do this.
No.
Where you eventually act like an adult.
You affirmed universal meaninglessness on a position that only has two options, and now you're saying I don't necessarily agree with that. Well, then do you accept that there is universal meaninglessness?
You're lying.
No, I'm not lying. I don't have to lie in a person who has bombed an entire debate for 2 hours. Why would I have to lie? You have crashed and burned, dude. I'm not lying about you. You're a terrible debater, objectively.
I get it. This is a debate game for you.
No, it's not a game. You crashed and burned miserably. But I entertained the entire discussion because I'm happy to explain the arguments to you.
Oh my God.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Can you just make your arguments without whining? You whined a bitch this whole time.
Yes, that is true. I have complained quite a lot.
Yes, whining and bitching because you can't deal with the arguments. You would rather whine and bitch about actually deal with the arguments.
No, it's just I'm trying to figure out where to go from here because you're just so childish, and it's so difficult to have a conversation.
Well, you're an effeminate soy man, so I'm gonna be childish with you. So how's that?
Sure, brother.
Yeah, brother.
Whatever makes you.
Okay, brother. Okay, Hulk Hogan. Okay.
Yeah. So again, I did not say any. I will reaffirm. I don't know. I'd have to think about many of the concept of.
Okay.
Whether
Well,
or not
maybe in a debate to say that I don't know.
I
don't know. Is that a good sign in a debate to be like, I don't know. Let me walk it back. I don't know.
Actually, I think that's a really good sign of someone that's actually being good faith as opposed to you.
Oh.
Right? That you're searching for a dub as opposed to.
So I don't know. Let me debate a topic. Let me walk it back and admit that I don't know. Right?
I didn't walk back anything.
You affirmed you affirmed that the universe is purposeless. Everybody heard you say that.
I did an internal critique. I said, why must there be purpose?
No, no. Now you're lying because you did explicitly verbally say, fine, it's purposeless. I'll go with that.
Yes, fine. I'll go with that. Yes, that is saying for the meaning, for the sake of continuing the argument forward.
It doesn't matter that you walk it back and say that it's not your position, which would mean it's in bad faith. If there's only two options, dude.
I
do the whole chat. You lost, dude. You done walking back? Everyone heard you affirm dysteleology. Everyone heard you affirm it.
I don't know how to continue this conversation.
Right, because you crashed and burned. Exactly.
It's not a matter of crashing and burning. It's just I made the mistake of trying to engage honestly with a piece of shit.
Right. So with a piece of so now it's all personal. When I keep it on the topic, you make it personal. All you did this whole time was whine until at the end I said you're a soy man. You talk nonstop shit about me, calling me a pussy, I bring you on here, you crash and burn and have a meltdown because you can't answer basic philosophical questions, man.
I agree that is your interpretation of events.
No, that's everyone's interpretation because that's what happened.
Fair enough. You win some, you lose some. Maybe one day I can, learn more about these arguments and debate it with somebody.
Interesting. So you're admitting that you don't know the topic. That's a good admission. I appreciate that.
Well, well, obviously, I would admit that there are aspects of any argumentation from other people that you don't know. Like, what kind of narcissistic?
No, I mean actual. I mean basic. You've had 3 debates now with people on our side of this, and you've not done any work to understand epistemology. You've done nothing. So you're the typical lazy libertarian Coomer man who doesn't actually study the positions. You haven't progressed against. After Andrew, after Jim Bob and me, you've made no progress at all in this topic.
This is so silly. I attempted to the best of my ability, to bring forth the argument.
All you have is to call names. That's all you've had. No, I let you talk for hours on end here today.
Well, fair enough.
And you made a bunch of bad arguments, and you're whining and melting down because your arguments are piss poor. They're sophomore level.
I think that is silly for you to say that I'm whining because my arguments are bad.
It's a deflection technique. When a person's crashing, that they start whining and bitching about the other person.
No, I just can't get my arguments out. Like it took me.
You got tons of bullshit out. No, you got a lot of bullshit out. We heard your stuff, and we know after 2 hours it's not going to get much better.
Fair enough. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to come here, regardless of whether or not I will recant my position that you are fully and wholly, a pussy or a coward in terms of debating, which I had said earlier, because it felt very fucked up that you had not brought on actual libertarians and only discussed with libertarians.
None of us give a shit about. Nobody cares what you think an actual libertarian is, or no true Scotsman. So we don't care about that.
Well, I mean, you at the very least.
I don't know who you. I don't care who you think is a real libertarian.
I know. Without God, words have no meaning or whatever.
No, I just don't care what you think a real libertarian is. Who is a real libertarian? You?
Anyone that legitimately and fully follows through on the non-aggression principle is.
Which is not an ought.
Claim to be.
Even though it is an ought.
Claim to be.
Right, which is an ought, but it's not an ought because it's an axiom, but it's also an ought. Right, exactly. You want to do super chats or not?
No, I'm good. But again, like I said, I'll